walked away, and I was like, it just felt like they killed our baby. You know, it felt like you handed your baby over to the Grim Reaper.
My name's Danielle. My daughter's Hayden, and she's 2, and she has Down syndrome. We did not receive a prenatal diagnosis for her. We found out right after she was born. The doctor just gave me that look, and I just knew with this little tiny purple baby sitting on my chest that something wasn't right. And I looked at her, and the words out of my mouth were, "Does she?" And she said, "I think so." And right then and there, that's when we found out. A few hours later, she was rushed to the NICU, where we fortunately only had to spend 6 days for feeding difficulties. And that's when we actually received the actual diagnosis of Down syndrome. We also learned about her heart defect, kidney defect. She had tracheomalacia, you know, just a few other things, because unfortunately with Down syndrome, a lot of people do experience health complications, and Hayden did have a few, but of course the major was she had a complete AP canal defect. So they were doing just their routine pediatrician check, and they thought they heard a small murmur. After the murmur, they did the echocardiogram, and then that's when they realized that, you know, she was missing those parts of her heart, and they informed us that she would have to have heart surgery at some point. And so they pretty much said that she would eventually become failure to thrive. She would lead into heart failure. It could cause respiratory distress, you know, feeding difficulties. There was like a plethora of things, you know.
And did you have any of those, or all of them, or not?
Pretty much all of them, but not severely like some people. You know, I'd say we were more blessed, you know, because she wasn't on oxygen, she wasn't on machines or anything like that. But she never would gain weight. When she was born, she was 6 pounds 10 ounces, and she was 7 pounds for the first 4 months of her life. So we struggled with the whole failure to thrive and the feeding difficulties. We would meet with many different doctors, dietitians, gastroenterologists, general surgeons, about, you know, G-tubes and NG tubes, just different options to try to get her to gain weight. And that's what came from the heart defect, because she was struggling that whole time. And she had a very fast respiratory rate, and that comes with it too. We didn't realize that she was in, I guess, respiratory distress because of her heart. We just thought it was her norm until we were admitted for heart surgery, and that's when they told us your child's in heart failure. We didn't receive anything prenatally. We found out while we were in the NICU. So it was like a whirlwind of emotions, because not only like when she was born did we see physically that something was different. She was purple, you know, and you can see the swollen face, like you could see that she had a lot of the characteristics of Down syndrome. But she was rushed to the NICU, and within 2 days you're hearing all these new terms from these new doctors that you never heard of before. The neonatologist is saying, you know, the Down, like I said, Down syndrome, heart defects, your child's never going to be able to play certain sports, and, you know, just the whole nine. It was a lot. Jordan and I complement each other really well. Like, I find that we are each other's strength. We never really grieved the child that we thought we were gonna have. We just took the ball and ran with it, you know, which I think is great for us. Even with the health complications, we always, I call myself a positive Polly. I always look at the bright side of things. And when we got found out about her heart defect, we knew that it was real serious, and the seriousness behind it, and or she could lose her life, and, you know, like all these different things. But it wasn't a terminal diagnosis. She wasn't diagnosed with cancer, or, you know, some heart babies, bless their souls, you know, lose their life within the first few hours or first few years, or need heart transplants, you know. We took it just day by day, you know, and processed it, and we didn't stress about it. And you know, we just was like, okay, we know she's gonna need surgery, but how can we get through today? So, and that's how we made it through and stayed strong and just persevered. The day, well, when we were in the NICU, Jordan and I sat down and had the conversation, you'll no longer be able to work, you know, at least until she has heart surgery, because, you know, she's going to require a lot of time, a lot of care. At least once a week we were at doctor's appointments or in the hospitals doing weight checks, blood work. Her heart was constantly being monitored because they were waiting for her to go into heart failure, you know. And the most important thing for us was her weight, because they needed her to be a certain weight before they can even do heart surgery, which was 10 kilograms before they can do surgery, because they're so tiny and fragile, and they want to make sure that they'll thrive after surgery. And their bodies are weak, so they have to fight extra hard. And so yeah, weekly we were at appointments. Like I said, weight checks. We met a lot with the geneticist and the cardiologist and the dietitian and a gastroenterologist to gain weight, because she just wouldn't. She would eat the right amount a typical infant would, but she just worked extra hard. So all the calories she was consuming, she was burning more than she would consume. And so we had to fortify her milk with different formulas, and then that's when the GI doctor stepped in and we had to look into feeding tubes and things like that. And that's when my first taste of advocacy came in, because her cardiologist at the time, we're no longer with him, but from day one said she would need a feeding tube, and he wanted a G-tube placed right away, and I was against, because it's a surgery that might not be a necessary surgery, and it's still her going through general anesthesia, you know, doing the whole nine. And we met with the general surgeon, I met with the GI doctor, and thankfully the GI doctor agreed with me and heard me out about trying the NG tube, which is just the little feeding tube you'll see in babies' noses, and it goes directly into their bellies, and there's no surgery required. Thankfully he was on the same page as me, trying that out first, because what if it didn't work? Or what if it did, and then we wouldn't even need the surgery, you know? And in our case it didn't work, because she was just that far into heart failure already that nothing was going to help her gain weight. When we were in the we actually were admitted to the hospital not for heart surgery, for the NG tube placement. For them to, we were only supposed to stay there for 2 days, and it turned into a little over 2 months. She was consuming upwards of 13,000 calories a day, which is like, I think the GI doctor, one of the residents told us it was like eating 20 Big Macs, you know, like if one of us would eat that, that's what she was, and she was in so much pain, and you know, but that was probably the hardest part for us and most stressful, was her trying to get her to gain that weight. So one of my biggest questions when Hayden was about to have heart surgery to the nurses was what to expect, because I didn't have anybody that had heart surgery, and here's my tiny 7-pound 4-month-old about to go in, and she's just so fragile, perfect, you know, and it's like, what's about to happen? And medically I knew, because I'm knowledgeable in that, but I needed somebody to just lay it down for me. And anyway, so she fasted all night, which we were pretty nervous about, because how do you keep an infant from eating? But she did phenomenal. The morning of surgery, she was probably the happiest she had ever been. I have a picture of her in her little pre-op gown, you know, with the little tigers all over it, and she has the biggest little smile on her face. And the anesthesiologist came to get her, and you know, we gave her sugars, and they took her to the back, and thankfully the cardiology team that worked with us, they gave us updates every 30 minutes. Yes, they did the 30 longest minutes of our lives, but it helped so much. So for me personally, the hardest part of the entire heart journey
was hearing that they stopped her heart. And I still remember that moment like it was yesterday. I just gasped for a breath of air, and me and Jordan had to walk away because I always feel like I have to be this strong person, and we had so many people there, and I just didn't want people to see me cry. And we walked away, and I was like, it just felt like they killed our baby. You know, it felt like you handed your baby over to the Grim Reaper, because they stopped her heart, and now she's on this bypass machine that's doing everything for her, her breathing, you know, and everything. And I knew they were going to do it, but when they told me they did it, and to know that her heart stopped beating, that was hard. But you knew it had to happen, and, you know, in that moment, now, right then and there, that part was behind us, and we could only move forward from there, and so we did. The surgery lasted a few hours, and it gets better. It does. It was after heart surgery. You know, the recovery process is a little difficult too, but nothing compared to hearing those words in the beginning. And in the hospitals, they have the child life specialists, you know, that come in and talk with you, and that's what helped us keep going too. Our journals, everything. So anything that was hard for me or anything I prayed about, I wrote down. And and Jordan and I's connections what really held myself together during the whole process. And a lot of people say that what was hard for them was seeing their child for the first time after, because they're still in that bypass machine, and they have IVs from head to toe, and that wasn't hard for us at all. When we walked in, we almost felt like this sigh of relief, because one, she was alive, and two, she just looked so peaceful, and she was just resting, and she looked, right away we noticed, you know, her color improved, and she was breathing so much better than she had before. And it was, you know, it was great, really. It was about 9 days after open heart surgery when I got to hold her for the first time. And I'll never forget that either. Like, I couldn't squeeze her or do anything that you would want to do with a little baby, but I got to hold her, you know, and it was just phenomenal. And you'll get to that point too, and just keep that sight in mind. And before you know it, you'll be telling your own story just like this, and it's not going to be such a scary thing. Your child's going to be thriving and running around and driving you insane very shortly. Right after surgery, you know, you spend a lot of time in the pediatric ICU, and they just monitor them. Well, for us, Hayden had withdrawals from the pain medicine, so we had to do like slow weaning and different things from that, because kids with Down syndrome have higher pain tolerance, and so they pump them up more because they're feisty. I don't think the doctors had to pull out anything on her, because she would pull out her catheter, her IVs, you know, she showed them what she was made of, and she still does, you know. So in the hospital, you always have doctors coming in and out, and it's pretty much the same. You know, once you're home, you stay on like a 30-day follow-up. So once a month, you're going to the cardiologist, constant chest x-rays. I guess they're looking for, like, you know, pleural effusion, different things like that, and just making sure that the heart's doing its job, and they're doing echoes, and 30 days, then it'll turn into 3 months, and then 3 months turns into 6, and we're finally on an annual recall. And it took us a little over a year after surgery to get on an annual recall, but we're finally there, and it's amazing.
How long were you was she in the hospital for after surgery?
After surgery, she was in the hospital for, so her surgery was on November 21st, and she was discharged on December 6th. So not too bad. I know we spent like 10 or 11 days in the ICU itself following surgery, and then they do like the step down, you know, so it's like a regular hospital room for the kids, and we didn't spend much time there at all afterwards. So a few days, you know, after that, and then they ultimately let us go home because we did everything for her, you know, like we gave her her meds, and, you know, we showed that we can do this, you know, we got this on our own, and she does too. And that's why they let us. Parents that fight for themselves and fight for their kids, they know that they'll do well at home or better at home been in a hospital full of germs and whatever. So they let her thrive at home, and that's exactly what happened. Having a child with a heart defect will change you completely. It might make you a little psychotic, a little germophobic, a little more controlling, and let me just say it's worth it. It'll be the hardest, the beginning of the journey is going to be the hardest thing you've ever been through, but it's so worth it, and the end goal is amazing, and you'll get there, and just keep that end goal in mind. Keep the dreams you have for your child alive in your mind while they're going through surgery, after surgery, and keep those positive vibes, because even if your child doesn't know any better, they feel those, and they'll get there, and so will you. And just stay strong. Stay strong. That's the best advice that I can give, but it does get so much better. So much better.